Welcome back, I'm that chemist. Today we're going to be discussing why we need specific vitamins, how they work from a biochemical perspective, and we're going to explain the various roles that vitamins can play in our cells. What are vitamins, and why are they called vitamins? Vitamins are small organic molecules which our body needs to be able to carry out its regular cellular processes. Vitamins are precursors, which become cofactors and coenzymes. These are used in enzymatic processes involving enzymes. When were vitamins discovered? When vitamins were discovered, they were thought to be vital amines, although this is a misnomer, as several of the vitamins are actually not, in fact, amines. For example, let's start with the first vitamin, vitamin A. Vitamin A has no nitrogens in it, therefore not an amine. Thanks, biologists. Vitamins are essential micronutrients that our body needs to survive. How, you might ask? We'll discuss this in great detail in the video. Essential nutrients can't be synthesized by our bodies, either not at all, or at least not in sufficient quantities. And therefore, vitamins must be obtained through our diet. I really like to use specific words like vitamin instead of they, but we're going to say vitamin like a billion times in this video, so I'm sorry ahead of time. The initial discovery of vitamins occurred in 1910, when Umataro Suzuki, a Japanese scientist, discovered thiamine, vitamin B1, as a complex of several B vitamins. In following years, more vitamins were discovered, and what we classify as a vitamin has changed over the years. While vitamins were only relatively recently discovered, a little over 100 years ago, it's been long known that we need to eat specific types of food regularly in our diet in order to stay healthy. There are two main groups of vitamins, water-soluble ones and fat-soluble ones. Water-soluble vitamins include the B vitamins, B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, and B12. Another water-soluble vitamin is vitamin C. In addition to the water-soluble vitamins, we also have fat-soluble vitamins. These include vitamins K, E, D, and A. In general, fat-soluble vitamins can be stored in the body, and they're less likely to cause a deficiency and more likely to cause toxicity due to hypervitaminosis, an excess of vitamins in the body. Since these are fat-soluble, they take longer for our body to eliminate, so unnecessary overconsumption of fat-soluble vitamins is something you want to avoid. In the case of water-soluble vitamins, these are more likely to be deficient in the body, as the body is readily able to eliminate any excess in the urine, our water-soluble waste removal system. See guys, so far it all makes sense. It's less likely that water-soluble vitamins are going to be present in toxic levels, since our kidney is able to eliminate them so rapidly. Water-soluble vitamins aren't stored in the same way, with the exception of vitamin B12, which is stored in the liver. We often refer to different vitamins such as vitamin K as one vitamin. Some vitamins can actually occur in a variety of different forms, often referred to as vitamins. Some vitamins may be more readily absorbed, and they also may be processed differently in the body. This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering a box of awesome with top-shelf goods from under-the-radar brands. It's free to join, and you can skip a month or cancel anytime. 90% of the products come from small brands, many of which are based right in the US. Terra. The knife in the Terra box is made by Bare Bones, based in Salt Lake City. Forge. This Damascus steel knife is made by Buck & Bear Knives, located in Pennsylvania. Trail. The gut hook knife in the Trail box is made by Titan International, located in Illinois. Carnivore. The American barbecue rub in the Carnivore box is made by the Great American Spice Co. in Rockford, Michigan. Every month, Bespoke introduces its members to cool new products, outdoor gear, barware, goods for your home and kitchen, clothing, and even more, even live oysters, based on a preference quiz that you can fill out. Every box of awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside, but costs you only a fraction of the value. Preview your box before it gets shipped. You'll get a box of awesome assigned to you, and before it's shipped, you'll get a preview of what comes inside to decide if you'd like to 1. Keep it, or 2. Swap it for a different box, or even 3. Skip the month entirely for no charge. You only pay for what you want. Did you know that the process of barrel aging spirits involves chemistry between the wood and the liquid it contains? The interior of the charred American white oak mini barrel from Marcellin infuses the spirits with flavors and aromas that come from the complex chemicals in the wood. Bottle them with the included bottling kit. Did you know that the vacuum siphon coffee maker uses physics to brew superior coffee? This stylish coffee siphon allows for precise control over time and temperature. With the vacuum siphon coffee maker, physics becomes your barista. To get 20% off your first box of awesome, click the link in the description and enter ThatChemist20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/thatchemist20. That way, they'll know you came from here. I want to thank Bespoke Post for their support of this channel. The first chemical on this tier list is vitamin A. Vitamin A has several forms, including retinol, retinoic acid, and retinal. Different forms of the same vitamin are frequently referred to as vitamers. In addition, our body is able to convert the different forms of vitamin A, including retinol and retinal, but not retinoic acid, to the various different forms it needs for the specific biological processes it's involved in. Because vitamin A is fat-soluble, that means that toxicity is more likely, since it gets stored in the fat and it's not readily excreted. The main nutritional sources of vitamin A include animal sources such as egg yolks, liver oil and meat, as well as cheese and butter. Hey, these are all fats. Vitamin A is fat-soluble. This all just makes perfect sense. Now, in terms of absorption, our body is able to absorb vitamin A as vitamin A esters. This is cleaved by an enzyme called carboxyl esterase to form free retinol, the alcohol form of vitamin A, as well as fatty acids. The free retinol is reesterified in the small intestine by an enzyme called lecithin retinol acyltransferase, and this gets stored as a retinol ester in the liver. Remember, it's fat-soluble, so the liver's just storing it for us. While hypervitaminosis can occur from excess vitamin A in the body, the synthesis of vitamin A in our body from carotenoids such as beta-carotene is well regulated, so there's no risk for hypervitaminosis A, assuming that you're a normal person with normal enzymes, when consuming beta-carotene. Normal levels of the alcohol form of vitamin A, retinol, in the blood are able to suppress the expression of SCARB1 and BCO1 beta-carotene 1515' dioxygenase, the enzyme that transforms carotene into its corresponding diol. This diol gets converted to two equivalents of the resulting aldehyde, and this resulting aldehyde is retinal. This is the form that our body uses in our eyes. Now let's talk about the functions of vitamin A in the body. Vitamin A is used by our eyes in the protein rhodopsin. Rhodopsin forms an imine, which is also known as a Schiff base, with cis-retinal. This is an isomer of the fully trans retinal that our body is able to absorb. The cis form is photosensitive. When our eyes receive light, this is detected by the cis-retinal that's bound to the rhodopsin. When the light is detected, this causes a chemical reaction to occur where the cis-alkene is photochemically converted to the trans-alkene. Once the all-trans product forms, this is released by rhodopsin and it's reconverted back into the cis form. This is the specific part where it might be too complicated, so I'll give the more complicated explanation now. This is photosensitive, and upon excitation by a photon, i.e. the perception of light, cis-retinal is converted back into trans-retinal. This is released by rhodopsin back into the retinal epithelium and converted back into cis-retinal. In addition to its role in the eyes, vitamin A has some other biological functions, including in gene regulation, normal bone and teeth growth, as well as normal cell differentiation. When the body experiences a vitamin A deficiency, which is rare, it's possible to experience night blindness. In addition to night blindness, other effects include metaplasia, keratinization, bone and teeth problems, as well as immunodeficiency or infections. While you might be concerned that you have vitamin A deficiency, unless you've been diagnosed by a doctor, you shouldn't make any assumptions. In fact, it's possible to have hypervitaminosis A due to an excess of vitamin A in the diet. Some symptoms of acute hypervitaminosis A include headache, blurry vision, nausea, and vomiting. Chronic hypervitaminosis A can lead to symptoms such as weight loss, anorexia, nausea and vomiting, as well as fractures. There are some clinical uses of vitamin A. Topically, it can be used to treat mild acne. It's also available orally, however, this is only used to treat severe cystic acne. There are some other medications, such as Accutane, which look a lot similar to some of the beta-carotenes or vitamin A. If you're interested in hearing a whole video about carotenoids in the future, such as astaxanthin, Accutane, leave a comment down below, and maybe that's something we can do. Vitamin A is the single most important cause of childhood blindness in developing countries. Food fortification has been successful, so much so that vitamin A intervention has been removed from research and into programming. Fortification is most prevalent as an additive in cereal and is implemented in South Asia, although its inclusion is optional in America and Canada. You might have heard of this stuff before. There's this product called golden rice. It's still on the market, and you might be able to find it somewhere. This was genetically modified to increase the amount of beta-carotene that the golden variety originally contained. It's claimed to make up to 23-fold more beta-carotene than the plant originally would have. As far as I know, that's all bioavailable, but for some vitamins, they may not be in their bioavailable form. You might be wondering what bioavailable means. So just because the nutrient is bound to some part of the food you eat doesn't mean that it's released. Later on in this video, we're going to be talking about some other vitamin deficiencies where the vitamin was already there, it just wasn't bioavailable. So back to the golden rice. While this may make more of the beta-carotene than the rice originally did, it doesn't solve any of the other nutritional shortcomings that consuming a solely rice diet would have. Personally, I don't know if this is very useful. The idea of this rice was that as it has more beta-carotene, it's going to solve this vitamin A deficiency that certain places in the world suffer from. usually due to poverty or consumption of food which is lacking in vitamin A. The product unfortunately wasn't a success, and since it didn't sell, you could say that the owners experienced a golden shower. This product was developed by the Rockefeller Foundation. In my mind, I look at the problem of vitamin A deficiency as one that you might be able to solve with local solutions. Sure, gene modification could work. If you want to do genetic modification of a plant to make it produce more of a specific vitamin, I don't have any issue with that. But do you know what's more pragmatic? Probably just finding local carotenoids in the environment and teaching people to eat those. Carotenes exist in many different forms in the environment, and a lot of different plants can produce carotenes. So if a bit of plant botany was done and suitable edible plants were identified that contain carotenoids, this might be a far more pragmatic solution since you don't have to develop and distribute a new plant. You can just take advantage of the carotenoids that a local plant already produces. Maybe there's issues with that approach, and if you have any opinions, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. Another interesting thing about vitamin A is that doctors have to be really careful when prescribing vitamin A to female sex patients of childbearing age, as they could be pregnant, and vitamin A can be teratogenic, and it's an abortifacient. That means that it's something that you definitely want to avoid. We've given a lot of time talking about the biology, but let's talk about the chemistry of vitamin A. Retinol is a polyunsaturated, polyconjugated compound with a terminal alcohol group. When a synthetic chemist sees this many double bonds in a row, we know we're going to have a bad time. It's quite impressive that BCO1 is able to do that selective oxidation of beta-carotene. A lot of the time in chemistry, we have tools to selectively react with specific functional groups, but nature is way better than organic chemists at doing chemistry selectively. Vitamin A is an important nutrient. In terms of being a vitamin, it plays an important role, and it's necessary in the diet. I know you're probably thinking, Joey, it's vitamin A. We already are expecting you to put it in A tier. And you're right. Vitamin A can go right into A tier. The next chemical in this tier list is thiamine, also known as vitamin B1. Some other forms of thiamine, other vitamers, include thiamine monophosphate and diphosphate. There's another chemical that has a similar name to thiamine called thymine. Thymine is a nucleobase in DNA synthesis. Thymine is different than thiamine. For clarity, I'll try to say thiamine as clearly as possible. In North America, most flour is fortified, meaning that it usually has vitamin B1, B2, B3, and B9 added to it. The main nutritional sources of vitamin B1 aside from fortified flour include eggs, non-refined whole grains, yeast, meat, vegetables, and nuts. The processing of grains removes the outer layer where the vitamin B1 is contained. As a consequence of this, processed flour that hasn't been fortified is deficient of the B vitamin that would be contained on the outside of the grain. As such, it probably isn't surprising to you that the consumption of solely white rice in your diet can lead to the development of vitamin B1 deficiency. While most flour and cereals are fortified, it's possible that if you're a celiac and you're consuming a gluten-free alternative, that your flour might not be fortified. So this is an important thing to look into, as you might not be getting the vitamins that you need in your diet, and this is something you might want to consult a doctor about. The B vitamins are water soluble. That means that they're more likely to be deficient in the diet, and they're less likely to cause toxicity. Since vitamin B1 is one of the B vitamins, this is going to be a water soluble one. For most of the metabolic reactions in our body, we need to be using the phosphorylated forms of thiamine, which for the most part is thiamine diphosphate. The most important role of thiamine is for the production of acetyl-CoA from pyruvate. Acetyl-CoA enters the TCA cycle, and this eventually results in the production of NADH in the cytoplasm. Depending on the different energy sources that you consume, your body can still produce energy. Now, what do we mean when we say that? Well, in this case, the breakdown of fats, sugars, and proteins all result in the formation of alpha keto acids. Usually these alpha keto acids are in the form of acyl-CoAs, and our body is able to use this to produce NADH, which can be used to generate ATP. Earlier on, I mentioned that the consumption of white rice solely could cause vitamin B1 deficiency. What is vitamin B1 deficiency? This is a syndrome known as beriberi. There are two different types of beriberi. There's dry beriberi, which involves neuropathy, and there's wet beriberi, which involves dilated cardiomyopathy. Another case where beriberi can arise is in alcoholics. If you're interested in why vitamin B1 deficiency can occur due to alcoholism, I'd encourage you to check out the recent video that we made on neurotoxins. Alcohol is a neurotoxin that depletes vitamin B1, and we talk about that a little bit more in that video. In terms of biological functions, vitamin B1 is a cofactor in biochemical reactions that result in the production of ATP. The main role that it plays is for the transfer of 2 carbon units. This is done with a dehydrogenase enzyme. Because it makes acetyl-CoA from pyruvate, the acetyl group is the 2 carbon unit of acetyl-CoA. Additionally, thiamine can be used as an N-heterocyclic carbene precursor in synthetic chemistry, as it forms this really neat thing called a Breslau intermediate, which has a ton of synthetic utility for organic chemists. When you take something like an aldehyde and treat it with a carbene, such as the one that vitamin B1 forms, it can form this neat thing called a Breslau intermediate. This gives you the synthetic equivalent of an acyl anion, and you don't have to do any sort of crazy deprotonation to generate an acyl anion. In fact, acyl anions aren't actually stable, which is why we have synthetic alternatives, such as the Corey-Seebach reaction, although we just access this for free, using something we find in nature. This acyl anion equivalent can be functionalized to generate a lot of different interesting products. Similar to how vitamin B1 is able to form a Breslau intermediate with aldehydes, our body is actually able to react vitamin B1, and this enables decarboxylation reactions. One example of this is the generation of acetyl-CoA from pyruvate, where initially the carbene is able to attack the ketone, and the molecule can undergo a decarboxylation reaction. The resulting anion is stabilized, and it can actually be drawn as a Breslau intermediate. All we really did here is access an aldehyde through a decarboxylation reaction thanks to thiamine. Thanks, biology, this one's actually pretty cool. When we're producing acetyl-CoA, thiamine diphosphate is used during glycolysis to produce acetyl-CoA using pyruvate dehydrogenase, magnesium, as well as NADH. NADH is another important cofactor that we're going to get to later on when we discuss niacin. This reaction generates an equivalent of NADH, and this is the reduced form of NAD+. That NADH is about to be cold hard cash in the electron transport chain of the mitochondria, the US stock exchange of the cell. If you're not sure what a dehydrogenase is, this just involves decarboxylation as well as conjugation with CoA. CoA is another important molecule that we're going to get to a little bit later. In addition to glycolysis, thiamine is used in the Krebs cycle. Acetyl-CoA is like the digital funds that are in a holding account, which your cells are going to use to buy stock, such as NADH. This is a stock exchange after all. I better have some stock analogies in here. The other cofactors and coenzymes in this process are like the people who broker the deal. One example is the enzyme alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. This is where the exchange happens. The enzyme, which is essentially the exchange here, is alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. Alternatively, this is also used in branched-chain alpha-ketoacid dehydrogenase. There's also a couple other pathways such as the HMP shunt in transketolase, but we're not going to get into that. Since B1 is involved in the synthesis of NADH, it finances the mitochondria. ATP, baby, let the cash flow. Now let's talk about the chemistry of vitamin B1 a bit. Vitamin B1 has a pyrimidine ring, as well as a thiazolium, but when this is deprotonated, it forms a carbene. We also have an alcohol group and this amino group sticking off here. Overall, I think the chemistry of vitamin B1 makes me think it's pretty neat, and when I learned about the whole formation of a Breslau intermediate, I am a chemist after all, I got super stoked about biochemistry. So for that reason, vitamin B1 got me hyped about biochemistry. I think we could put vitamin B1 right into S tier. Next, we have another B vitamin, riboflavin. If you like yellow chemistry, riboflavin is the vitamin for you.
All yellow chemistry is trash. If it's yellow, it's trash and your synthesis doesn't work. If your synthesis at any point goes yellow, it just stops working, all right? Confirmed fact.
Riboflavin comes from the root flavio, which means yellow. Vitamin B2 has 3 forms, including riboflavin, flavin mononucleotide, and flavin adenine dinucleotide. These are known as FMN and FADH accordingly. FMN and FAD are cofactors derived from riboflavin and vitamin B complexes. It's possible to get your vitamin B through enriched grains, such as wheat flour. Although, it's also possible to take B vitamin supplements, which contain lots of vitamin B2. If you want natural sources, yeast, eggs, and mushrooms all have lots of vitamin B2. Vitamin B2 enters the body bound to albumin, and first it must be cleaved by hydrochloric acid in the stomach and absorbed in the duodenum, or duodenum, if you prefer. Vitamin B2 toxicity is less likely. Once again, this is another B vitamin, and all the B vitamins are water-soluble. Riboflavin deficiency is rare in North America. This is likely because we fortify our food. Some causes of riboflavin deficiency include malnutrition, such as in abject poverty, anorexia nervosa, and aversion from drinking milk. This could be because you're lactose intolerant. There's riboflavin in milk. If you drink less milk, because the milk can be damaged by UV, you end up absorbing less of the B2. It's also possible that you have normal intake, but you have decreased consumption. This could be due to IBS, celiac disease, OCPs, long-term barbiturate use, or MADD. Riboflavin is also used as a yellow-orange food coloring. Now, we're going to be talking about riboflavin a little bit later on. I apologize if you're looking forward to the biochemistry here. In terms of the chemistry of vitamin B2, it has this interesting motif, which is a quinoxylene. However, it's also a pteridine, so technically it's a benzopteridine. This is derived from GTP and it's biosynthesized in bacteria. There's also a tetra-alcohol, which we call a tetrol, side chain, and the terminal alcohol is phosphorylated to give FAD and FMN. I think that vitamin B2 is a little bit less cool of a vitamin. There's a couple cool redox processes. Overall, I think because vitamin B2 is fairly easy to get enough of in your diet, as long as you're eating a variety of foods or you're supplementing to make sure you get the right amount, I think that vitamin B2 can probably go into like D tier. Not a very interesting vitamin, at least not yet. Next, we have vitamin B3. Vitamin B3 occurs in several different forms, including in niacin, niacinamide, or niacinamide riboside. Here we have niacinamide. Another name for this is nicotinamide, but when you hear nicotinamide, you probably think nicotine, and we're going to get to why that is in a little bit. There are many sources of vitamin B3 in the diet, as our body is also able to synthesize vitamin B3 from tryptophan. Niacin's also added in enriched foods. When you're deficient of vitamin B3, you get a disease known as pellagra. The three main symptoms of pellagra include diarrhea, dermatitis, and dementia. There's also a fourth D if you include death. The most common cause of vitamin B3 deficiency is from eating only a corn-based diet where there's no niacin or tryptophan. In fact, tortillas actually saved Latin America from pellagra. People realized that niacin is actually present in the corn, but it's not bioavailable. So it was necessary to treat tortillas with base to release the niacin and make it bioavailable. There's actually a great video from Medicosis Perfectionalis, and I'll include a link to that in the description if you want to hear the whole tortilla story. So back to the part about nicotine. Niacin used to go by the name nicotinic acid, as we started discovering vitamins just around 100 years ago. Since it used to be called nicotinic acid, when the government started making fortified wheat flour, two conspiracy theories popped up. People thought that nicotinic acid was the same as nicotine. Here's a structure of nicotinic acid. Here's the structure of nicotine. You can see that they're kind of similar, but only in the sense that they have a pyridine ring and that there's something sticking off in the 3 position, shown here. So the conspiracy theories were that people thought that the government was putting tobacco in bread. The other thing that people thought was smoking gives you vitamins. Both of those are not true. As such, the AMA changed the name to niacin so that people who didn't know what nicotine and nicotinic acid were stopped thinking dumb things. The United States introduced the addition of niacin to grain in 1940. It's currently produced synthetically through the oxidation of 3-cyanopyridine. When niacin fortification was first introduced, niacin was typically extracted from natural sources such as liver and yeast. Usually, niacin deficiency occurs due to abject poverty, alcoholism, and anorexia. Niacin seems like pretty boring, right? It's just a ring with an acid or an amide, but it's actually really useful because niacin is used to make NAD and NADP. Recall, these are some of the stock choices that the mitochondria has. NAD plus and NADP plus are like the stock when the price is low, and when they get converted to NADH and NADPH, this is like when the stock is high in value. Now let's talk about the chemistry of vitamin B3. Overall, it's pretty simple. It's just got a pyridine ring and an amide or an acid, depending on which form it is. So I think as a vitamin goes, chemically it's pretty boring, but once it's been converted to NADPH or NADH, it becomes way more interesting. Some of the reactions that this can do that you can see later on are really interesting. So why don't we put this into S tier? The next vitamin is vitamin B5. What the heck, B5? Do we just skip vitamin B4? Yeah, there used to be a bunch of other ones, but somebody decided that they're not vitamins anymore, and maybe that's something that we'll talk about in a future video.
Okay.
Vitamin B5 is also known as pantothenic acid or pantothenate. You might be thinking, those are two different things. One of them is an acid and one of them isn't an acid. And in chemistry and biology, we often refer to acids, as well as their base form, by different names. In this case, pantothenate is just the conjugate base of pantothenic acid, and it'll have essentially the same properties biologically. Once it gets absorbed into the body, it'll get converted into the relevant forms, and biology tends to figure out a lot of stuff on its own. The name literally means from everywhere, so pantothenate can be found almost everywhere. Vitamin B5 is not a mandatory food fortification in any country, although most cereals are fortified with 100% of the daily value of 5 milligrams. Another vitamin of B5 includes pantothenic acid. Pantothenic acid is used to make coash or CoA. This is different than acetyl-CoA, this is just the CoA. So the CoA part of acetyl-CoA is only able to be made using vitamin B5. This is what CoA looks like, and this is what acetyl-CoA looks like. Now, in terms of deficiency and toxicity for vitamin B5, both of them are extremely rare. However, when it comes to the chemistry, vitamin B5 itself is pretty simple. All it has is a couple alcohol groups, an amide, and a carboxylic acid. However, if you look at the structure of CoA, I would rather become a biologist than synthesize that. This one's pretty simple. It is used for CoA, and CoA is pretty cool. I think this probably can go into like A tier because acetyl-CoA is pretty awesome, and you can't make acetyl-CoA without CoA, so we have to use vitamin B5, at least a little bit. All this is really doing for almost all of its function is just as a linker though, so maybe that's actually kind of boring. I'm just going to leave it there, it's simpler. Here we have vitamin B6. I think vitamin B6 is probably my favorite vitamin because the mechanism of its chemical reactivity is just so incredible, and we're going to be discussing it shortly. Vitamin B6 is found in several different foods, including meats, yeast, plants, fish, egg yolks, and even more food sources. There are 3 different vitamers of vitamin B6, including pyridoxine, pyridoxamine, and pyridoxal. Pyridoxal 5-phosphate is the main metabolically active form of vitamin B6. This is a coenzyme used in more than 140 enzymatic reactions for the metabolism of amino acids, glucose, as well as lipids. This is probably going to be an S-tier vitamin. Plants actually synthesize pyridoxine as a means of protection from UVB, which they are exposed to through sunlight. Vitamin B6 is also used in the synthesis of chlorophyll. While including vitamin B6 as a food fortification isn't mandatory in any country, most cereals are still fortified with 25% of the daily value, 0.5 milligrams. This is also a cofactor for transamination reactions, as well as decarboxylation reactions, and these are the things that get me fired up about vitamin B6. Transamination is this really cool process where we start with an amino acid as well as an alpha keto acid. This could be an alpha keto acid like we talked about earlier, such as pyruvate or alpha ketoglutarate. What happens is the initial amino acid is converted into an alpha keto acid, and the alpha keto acid is converted into an amino acid. This occurs through an enzyme-mediated process where the initial iminium, which is stabilized by the ortho-hydroxy group, is able to isomerize, transferring the oxidation state of the vitamin B6 and oxidizing the amino acid to an alpha keto acid. Once this new amino version of vitamin B6 is generated, it's going to get converted back to the aldehyde. One example of this would be if we converted alanine into pyruvate, or similarly, aspartate gets converted into oxaloacetate. Oftentimes when we see an amino acid and want to convert it to the corresponding amine, vitamin B6 is also involved with these. One example of this is the decarboxylation of 5-HTP into serotonin. 5-HTP is just 5-hydroxytryptophan, and the generation of 5-hydroxytryptophan is actually mediated by another vitamin, vitamin C, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. Another important biochemical process that I really want to highlight here is that vitamin B6 is needed to synthesize vitamin B3 out of tryptophan through the kynurenine process. Now, in terms of the chemistry of vitamin B6, it's pretty cool. Several of the functional groups have roles in the chemistry of vitamin B6. It's essentially doing reactions that synthetic chemists can only dream of. It has a pyridine ring with an aldehyde or an alcohol group, and depending on the form that it's in, it can do all sorts of different things. This one's super duper cool. This is going to go right into S tier. The next vitamin is biotin. I know someone who really likes biotin, don't you, Garrett? Vitamin B7 is also known as biotin, and biotin deficiency is actually really rare since it's common in most foods. One way that biotin deficiency can occur is through the consumption of raw egg whites. Raw egg whites contain a protein called avidin, and this is an anti-nutrient that prevents the absorption of biotin. Vitamin B7 is not a mandatory food fortification. The average biotin intake from foods in other Western populations is about 35 to 70 micrograms per day, indicating that most people in these countries consume adequate amounts of biotin. Biotin is used for carboxylation reactions. One example of this is the conversion of acetyl-CoA into malonyl-CoA. This is a bit weird from a chemistry perspective because for vitamin B7 to fulfill its role, it first must carboxylate one of the urea nitrogens of biotin. Biotin has a urea group, it has a tetrahydrothiophene, as well as this carboxylic acid, which is usually bound to stuff. I don't think vitamin B7 is as cool. It's got kind of a weird reaction mechanism where it gets carboxylated, but overall, I just don't think it's that cool of a vitamin. Biotin can go right into F tier. I mean, there's sulfur in it, and biologists hate sulfur. You might think it's just the smells, but no, biologists hate doing any conjugation work. Biologists either, okay, whatever. I gave up on trying to say something anecdotal there. The next vitamin is vitamin B9, also known as folic acid, or folate. Similar to how pantothenic acid and pantothenate were two forms of the same thing, folic acid and folate are similarly named. When folate is consumed, it's usually in its oxidized form, as shown here. However, for it to carry out its biochemical processes, it has to be in its reduced forms, dihydrofolate or tetrahydrofolate. Tetrahydrofolate can be abbreviated to THF, and this is something that biologists frequently do. Unfortunately, chemists also have an abbreviation, THF, and this is for tetrahydrofuran. This means that chemists get really confused when they take a look at biopapers. Yes, this is a really common thing. I'm definitely not just talking about me. THF? WTF? There are several different forms of folate in the diet, and it's usually found in green leafy vegetables. Regulations for mandatory fortification of wheat flour with folic acid are currently in place in 53 countries. Similarly, in Canada, the mandatory fortification of foods with folic acid was introduced in 1998. According to Medicosis Perfectionalis, who's a trained physician, most doctors will almost never see patients come in with vitamin B deficiencies. Like, someone who watches this will have a vitamin B deficiency, and I really don't want to discourage them from going to the doctor. Because someone for sure will be. No matter what I talk about, someone who's watching is somehow able to relate to the craziness in every single video. In terms of function, folic acid and folate are involved with the transfer of 1-carbon units in DNA synthesis and cell replication. Tetrahydrofolate is used to transfer a methyl group to vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 further donates this methyl group to something called homocysteine, and this is how our body is able to make methionine. Now, in terms of the chemistry of vitamin B9, it has this interesting motif called the pteridine ring. We briefly talked about pteridine rings earlier when we were discussing vitamin B2, riboflavin. There are other roles of tetrahydrofolate in the body aside from the transfer of methyl groups, although we're not going to get into this now. Overall, I think this is a pretty basic vitamin. It isn't too interesting, but it does transfer methyl groups, and that's kind of cool, I guess. I think we could put vitamin B9 into like C tier, because it helps vitamin B12 do its job, but other than that, it's a bit underwhelming. Speaking of vitamin B12, why don't we talk about vitamin B12? This is one of the coolest B vitamins, and from an organic chemistry perspective, we're starting to see more and more biomimetic processes. This just means a process that mimics biology. A recent example of this is the development of SH2 catalysis, which can utilize processes that mimic vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 comes in several forms. A couple examples include cyanocobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, methylcobalamin, and adenosylcobalamin. Vitamin B12 is an important cofactor in DNA synthesis, as well as fatty acid and amino acid metabolism. Fortification of vitamin B12 is not required in the US and Canada. However, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom require cereals and some plant-based milk alternatives to be fortified with B12. Mandatory fortification of the B vitamins reduce neural tube defects by 30 to 50%. Now, in terms of the chemistry of vitamin B12, there is a lot to talk about. If you think that vitamin B12 has interesting chemistry, there's actually a fully recorded lecture on YouTube from Woodward himself. Woodward and Eschenmoer completed the total synthesis of vitamin B12 in 1972. If you want to know what a research talk was like in 1972, I'd encourage you to check out that whole video. There's even a couple spicy bits in it. I think because the chemistry is so cool, and I know I'm really not doing it justice in this video by talking about it, we're going to have to put vitamin B12 right into S tier. Matey, have you heard of vitamin C? How about ascorbic acid? Because that's another name for vitamin C. This is not citric acid. Yes, citric acid starts with a C. Yes, citric acid is found in citrus fruits, but so is ascorbic acid, vitamin C. Both are still present in citrus fruits. While citric acid is present in large amounts, vitamin C is actually present in relatively small amounts. There are some other forms of vitamin C, aside from ascorbic acid, including ascorbate, which is the base form of ascorbic acid, and the oxidized form of ascorbic acid, dehydroascorbic acid. Unfortunately, vitamin C is destroyed in cooking and storage, as well as processing, so usually, vitamin C needs to either be formulated or consumed fresh. Maybe that means you want to eat a fresh orange once in a while. Vitamin C is only found in fruits and vegetables, especially citrus fruits. In the United States, vitamin C fortification is not mandatory. However, most nations have adopted specific regulations with an upper and lower limit for certain foods, such as in Canada. Ascorbic acid is mandatory in fruit-flavored drinks, infant formula, diet foods, meal replacements, instant foods, evaporated milk, and dehydrated potatoes. Hypervitaminosis C is rare, since it's another water-soluble vitamin, and deficiency of vitamin C causes scurvy, and modern pirates can get scurvy too. You might have heard before that vitamin C is effective against the common cold. This was a misconception stated by Linus Pauling, and it's not true. So just because you got a Nobel Prize doesn't mean you're right about everything, okay? Now, with a couple vitamins on this tier list, they qualify as antioxidants. Vitamin C is considered to be an antioxidant. However, this is one that your body can actually use to reduce oxidative stress. This is one that your body literally uses inside cells, and we know that this works. While this is technically true, it's a bit of an oversimplification, because when vitamin C reacts with free radicals, it produces the oxidized form, dehydroascorbic acid. The oxidized form has to be reduced back to the active form after it's been used. It's actively imported into the endoplasmic reticulum of cells via glucose transporters. Once it's in there, it's reduced back to ascorbate by glutathione and other thiols. Hey, remember how earlier we were talking about NADH and NADPH? Well, NADPH is the reductant which reduces glutathione disulfide back to glutathione, and glutathione is what reduces the dehydroascorbic acid back into ascorbic acid. So technically, NADPH is the antioxidant here. And where do we get NADPH from? That's right, the burning of energy. So how do we get antioxidants? We burn energy. And in fact, that actually makes sense if you think about it. Because for our mitochondria to produce energy, we have to use oxygen, and oxygen is an oxidant. So to use the oxygen, we have to reduce the oxygen. That's why we have the electron transport chain. Some functions of vitamin C in cells include the hydroxylation of collagen in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. This is a type of post-translational modification, and when collagen is less hydroxylated, it's less stable, and this is what leads to some of the symptoms of scurvy. Specific residues of the collagen that are hydroxylated include the conversion of proline into hydroxyproline, as well as the conversion of lysine into hydroxylysine. Now, because these are protein-bound, this is happening to the protein after translation, after the protein's been made. This is a post-translational modification. You remember earlier how we were talking about dihydrofolate and tetrahydrofolate? Well, vitamin C is also needed to reduce folate into dihydrofolate and tetrahydrofolate. So vitamin B9 needs vitamin C to be able to do its job. Earlier on, I mentioned that vitamin C was needed to convert tryptophan into 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan. This is eventually needed for serotonin before undergoing decarboxylation with vitamin B6. If we look at the oxidized form of vitamin C, you'll recognize that it looks cursed AF. Here we have a 1,2,3 tricarbonyl, and that's so crazy that one of the alcohol groups is able to come around and attack and form this thing called a lactol. The other carbonyl is just like, yeah, sure, cool, I'll also add water to me. In fact, why don't I add water to both of these and even open back up again? So that's pretty cursed. Vitamin C, cursed starts with a C. Vitamin C is going to go right into C tier. There is one other thing I didn't mention here. Vitamin C also resembles this cool acid called squaric acid, which is literally a square. And while you might think squaric acid is pretty cursed, I still think that dehydroascorbate is way more cursed. Up next, we have vitamin D, also known as calciferols. The D vitamins technically aren't even vitamins. What? Vitamin D can be synthesized in adequate amounts by most mammals if they get enough sunlight. So it's not technically essential, and therefore isn't technically a vitamin. Instead, it can be considered a hormone, with activation of the vitamin D prohormone resulting in the active form calcitriol, which then produces effects via nuclear receptors in multiple locations. Vitamin D is mostly just a signaling molecule that our body uses as a hormone. Some vitamins, if you can call them that for vitamin D, include lumisterol, ergocalciferol, which is vitamin D2, cholecalciferol, which is vitamin D3, as well as some other forms. Vitamin D2 and D3 are the important ones that we need to consider in humans, especially vitamin D3. In the early 1900s, nearly 80% of children suffered from lowered bone density, also known as rickets, and a solution was proposed, feeding cod liver to cows. Cod liver is rich in vitamin D, and feeding the cows the cod liver increased the amount of vitamin D in milk, which thus decreased the occurrence of rickets. This is something that's still done through several different ways. Sometimes this is introduced through the feed, other times it's done through injections, or another way it can be done is through UVB irradiation from the sun or artificial lighting. The vitamin D in feed can either be plant or fungi-based ergocalciferol, or alternatively, it could still be animal-based cholecalciferol. In terms of toxicity, the toxicity of vitamin D is actually rather rare. It usually occurs due to supplementing with high doses of vitamin D rather than getting sunlight. In terms of the biochemistry, vitamin D is used for managing calcium levels, and it's a ligand for the vitamin D receptor, which is a way to regulate DNA expression. Now, in terms of the chemistry of vitamin D, it kind of looks like a steroid molecule that was smacked so hard that it ripped one of the rings open, because that's exactly how it's made. Initially, we have provitamin D3. This is excited by UVB and undergoes a retro-Diels-Alder reaction, forming this triene. This triene is able to undergo a thermal isomerization, rearranging the position of the double bonds through an ene-like reaction, and the resulting vitamin D3 is able to be oxidized to calcitriol through two enzyme-mediated steps. Calcitriol is a polyunsaturated triol, and aside from that, there's not too much to say other than it used to be a steroid. Vitamin D is a signaling molecule. Overall, I think it's probably one of the more boring ones, so we can put it into D tier. And I swear, guys, I'm not just putting them in the letter that they start with, even though some of them are. But okay, that has happened a couple times, but that's okay. You're patient, because you're an S tier viewer. Next, we have vitamin E. Vitamin E isn't actually one molecule, it's a whole bunch of molecules. When I was growing up, we had this vitamin E cream that we would sometimes use when we had dry skin. In my opinion, it never really did anything. It just made my skin gross and oily. And guess what? That's because vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin. There's several different vitamins of vitamin E, and these are called tocopherols. You might have heard of vitamin E before in the form of vitamin E acetate. Sometimes, people have added vitamin E acetate to vapes, and this is a really terrible idea because vitamin E acetate is something tolerated in food when eaten, but when smoked or when heated to very high temperatures, this can form something called ketene, and ketene is extremely toxic. So you're creating this very toxic ketene gas in your lungs when vaporizing vitamin E acetate. This is a really terrible idea. Make sure you're not vaping any vitamin E acetate. Please, 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 please don't do that. You might be wondering, why is anybody dumb enough to do that? Well, it turns out that vitamin E has similar physical properties to THC, so sometimes people will try and make weed vapes cheaper by cutting it with vitamin E acetate. This is really dangerous, and absolutely nobody should be doing this. Vitamin E comes from fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and seed oils. Deficiency of vitamin E is actually very rare. It's worth noting, though, that there's a serious drug-drug interaction with something called warfarin. Vitamin E, when it gets oxidized, becomes a quinone, and in its quinone form, it's an inhibitor of vitamin K-dependent gamma hydroxylase. This prevents your blood from coagulating. In addition, warfarin also prevents coagulation of blood. So together, when warfarin and vitamin E are both being taken, this can cause people to bleed too much when injured, since both of them cause you to bleed more easily. In most of the world, vitamin E fortification is voluntary. However, in Canada, it's mandatory if there is a reduction in vitamin or mineral content due to processing. In terms of biological importance, vitamin E is one of the other cool ones. One of the things it can do is sit around in the fatty acid membrane and react with reactive oxygen species. It does this in red blood cells, muscles, nerves, as well as in our retina. This one's actually pretty clever biology. Initially, what happens is a reactive oxygen species is able to get reduced by vitamin E to quench the radical, and then the oxidized form of vitamin E is able to get reduced back by the body. Vitamin E is also used in the synthesis of ubiquinone. It's actually pretty cool if you look at the oxidized form of vitamin E, because this is able to oxidize ubiquinone in its ubiquinol form into ubiquinone, its oxidized form. There's these two methoxy groups on the ubiquinone ring, and these are electron donating groups. Because there's those two electron donating groups, if we compare those to the methyl groups of the quinone of vitamin E, the methoxy groups are just way stronger electron donating groups. So that means that TQ, the oxidized form of vitamin E, is actually a stronger oxidant than ubiquinone, and this is why it's a favorable reaction to form ubiquinone. Vitamin E is also used in the synthesis of DNA and RNA. In terms of its chemistry, vitamin E is actually pretty boring, but the biochemistry that it does when oxidized and reduced is actually pretty clever. When it gets oxidized, it actually opens up the whole ring into a quinone. However, it can be reduced back to its closed ring form as needed. Vitamin E overall, I think, is pretty boring in terms of chemistry. I think it's pretty cool that it sits around in the lipid membranes to prevent oxidation of fatty acids. That's pretty cool. Overall, I think the quinone chemistry is pretty cool. I like seeing oxidation reduction chemistry happening in biological organisms. Why don't we put vitamin E into B tier? Last but not least, we have vitamin K, the quinones. It wasn't until I was working on this video that I saw the oxidized form of vitamin E, and I realized how similar it was to vitamin K. The only difference is that we have two methyl groups instead of a whole benzene ring like vitamin K does. Vitamin E's oxidized form is a 1,4-quinone, while vitamin K's quinone is a benzoquinone. Vitamin K stands for coagulation. It's used to help our blood coagulate. Bacteria in our gut produce vitamin K2, and there's technically 3 total vitamers of vitamin K. Vitamin K1, which is phyloquinone, vitamin K2, which is menaquinone, and vitamin K3, also known as menadione. Vitamin K3 shouldn't be used in humans, at least not according to health authorities in North America. Vitamin K fortification is not required by law in most countries. For instance, in the United States, it's optional for food manufacturers to add vitamin K to their products. Similarly, Canada has no specific requirements pertaining to vitamin K fortification, but the nutrient is included in the general requirements for nutrient content claims and nutrition labeling. In the European Union, vitamin K is only allowed to be added to certain types of infant formulas. The K vitamins are fat-soluble vitamins. There are some other forms that are not found in nature, which technically can't be considered vitamins. Vitamin K3, also known as menadione, is a synthetic compound that's sometimes referred to as vitamin K3. This is used in the pet food industry because once it's consumed, it gets converted into vitamin K2 in the body of the animal. However, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has banned this form from sale as a human dietary supplement because large doses have been shown to cause allergic reactions, hemolytic anemia, and cytotoxicity in liver cells. Now, personally, I think if we don't want that happening in people, we probably shouldn't be doing it in animals either. Or if we are doing it in animals, hopefully it's not as bad for them as it is for us. Vitamin K is used for carboxylation reactions. Specifically, it's used for gamma-glutamyl carboxylase, where protein-bound glutamate is converted to carboxyglutamic acid. This is an uncommon amino acid that's introduced into proteins by a post-translational carboxylation of glutamic acid residues. One place where this modification is found is in clotting factors and other proteins of the coagulation cascade. This modification introduces an affinity for calcium ions. In the blood coagulation cascade, vitamin K is required to introduce gamma carboxylation of clotting factors 2, 7, 9, 10, and protein Z. Overall, I think vitamin K is pretty simple. It's an oxidant that our body needs for specific processes. It's almost the same as vitamin E in terms of structure. I think we could probably put vitamin K into B tier as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed this tier list about vitamins, and hopefully you understand a little bit better why we need vitamins now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.